My name is Maury Hill. My date of birth is January 17th, 1947. I was born in the Elizabeth Hospital in Prairie Grove.
And this interview is for the Farmington Oral History Project, and we just want to verify that we have your permission to use the interview.
Yes, you do.
Who were your parents?
My parents were Thelma and Blaine Hill.
Tell me about your family, your siblings.
I have three older sisters. Charlene Dunn now is her married name. Louise Nolan. Charlene lives in Springdale. Louise lives in Kansas City. And then Kay Luttrell lives here locally in Fayetteville. And I'm the youngest one.
Okay. Tell me about your family's business.
My dad has farmed all of his life. He milked cows, and I wanted to farm, and he didn't really want me to farm, but I wanted to milk cows, so I did.
What was your part in the family business?
Well, I went to school in Farmington, and one of us kids had to get up and help Dad milk before we went to school every morning. And whenever we got home from school, each one of us had our own chores to do, and we knew what to do. So we had to get them done as soon as we got home from school. But my dad farmed all of his life. That's all he ever did.
Tell me about some of those specific chores you would have to do, the different ones you would have to do on certain days.
Well, we heated with wood in the house, and Dad always had a big wood pile, and one of my chores was to carry in wood. And my dad, at the time when I was real young, milked cows by hand. And we had one cow. One of my sisters would get on one side, one would get on the other, and I got between her back legs, and we milked. And I had polio when I was 5 years old. That was in 1952. And I was in Elizabeth Hospital for 30 days, and then I went to Tulsa and was over there 60 days. When I went to the hospital, one of my sisters asked my dad, said, well, who's going to take Maury's tit? Well, whenever I got back from the hospital, my dad had bought an electric milking machine. And we thought that was the greatest thing on earth.
How much time did that save you having the electric milking machine?
Well, it saved a lot of time because a milker could milk a cow so much faster than what we could milk by hand. Of course, my dad, he was milking 7 cows at the time, and he helped build the dam at Lake Weddington with a team of horses. So he had to get up and milk 7 cows and walk to Lake Weddington, work all day, come back and milk 7 more. So whenever he got the electric milking machine, that was a big deal. And then he built a grade A milk barn. He sold his first grade A milk in October of 1954. And we milked cows continuously till my wife and I sold the cows in 1990. It was getting where you just had to milk more cows and have more equipment and do more things to be legal.
Tell me about other jobs you would work when you were a young man to try to make money besides working on the farm.
Well, I mainly worked on the farm. My dad did not want me to farm. He wanted me to try construction work. So I graduated school in 1966, and I worked for Carl Toon's construction company that summer. I was making $1.25 an hour. Thought I was getting rich. We were digging they were working on the football stadium, Razorback Stadium. We were digging a sewer line under the bleachers. It had to be dug 6 foot deep, and it had to be dug by hand. And I got paid $1.25 an hour. I worked that one summer and did not like it. I come home and told Dad, I said, I'm gonna milk cows. So that's what I did until 1990, and then we just have cow and calf pairs now. We run beef cattle.
Tell me what it was like growing up on the farm. What were some of your daily routines besides chores?
Well, we kind of had to make our own fun, you know. Back then there wasn't videos, and we didn't even have TV back then. So we got out and did the best we could, you know, and we raised a lot of ponies. My dad, he had bought a little pony just before I had polio. He got her to Washington County sale barn, and this was in 1952, and she was real poor. He gave $8 for her. Well, I had a pony to ride, and I really liked that. And when I had polio, they said I would never walk again. Well, I was wanting to get home to ride that pony. Well, I was in the hospital 90 days, and I got to come home, and I was walking. And they bought me a bicycle. They said that was the best exercise I could do. So I rode a bicycle and rode that pony. My dad saddled her every day. And I'd ride down to my neighbors and ride up and down the road. And we didn't have TV to watch. We didn't have video games or anything like that. So we had to get out and make our own fun. And of course, come chore time, well, each one of us kids knew what we had to do, so we went and got our chores done.
Talk about where you lived and the area your farm was in and some of your neighbors.
Well, I was born and raised on this farm. This farm was bought in 1918. My granddad Hill bought it, and then of course my dad was here, and I'm the third generation. And then my son is the fourth, and his kids are the fifth generation to live on this farm.
Tell me about your earliest memories of Farmington.
Well, I guess that's when I started the school. Of course, I went to school at Farmington all 12 years. And whenever I was in grade school, Stark's Brothers was a big nursery outfit here in the Farmington area. They were a nursery that grew a lot of different kind of trees. And right across the road from the grade school where the round building is sitting now, I can remember when they farmed that and grew trees in it. And then they would dig them and ship them out all over the country. I played baseball a little bit, and I played a little bit of basketball. And there just wasn't a whole lot to do.
What was school like? I mean, what was your class like, and what were your teachers like?
Oh, they were great, you know. I mean, we rode the bus every day to school, and we went to school. And
who were some of your classmates?
Tommy Woods, Larry Garrett, Bonnie Lynch, Gerald Dove was one. And you know, I've lost track, and I don't remember. Of course, whenever we graduated in '66, we were the largest class to ever graduate in Farmington, and there were 36 of us.
Who were some of the teachers you remember?
Ms. Brown was my first grade teacher. Lena Bell Beckett was my third grade teacher, and that's the two teachers that I remember the best. Mr. Vafakis in Prairie Grove, and I think he's still alive. He was my history teacher in the 10th grade. I remember him real well.
What was sports like in those days? What sports did they have at school, and which ones were you involved in?
Sports, they had baseball, and I played baseball. They had basketball, and I played. I think they just had an 8-man football team back then. I never did play football.
Now, tell me about some of the people you remember in the town of Farmington.
Rika White had a little grocery store. I think there was 3 little grocery stores in Farmington. Rika White had one. There was another one there on 170 where the tobacco store is today, and I cannot remember their names. There just wasn't a whole lot in Farmington. There was a post office, but there just wasn't a whole lot in Farmington to do.
What do you remember about the postmaster and his wife that worked there? Do you remember them?
No, I don't.
Let's talk about where did your family attend church, if you did attend church?
We was raised here on Goose Creek, and we went to Highland Church. We was there every Sunday and every Wednesday night, every Sunday night. But the whole community went to Highland Church, community building.
Tell me some of the people that you remember from Highland.
Well, Edna Lowe was my Sunday school teacher. Beulah and Ray Davis, I remember them real well. Russell Poole, I remember him. Of course, Tom and Edna Lowe. Like I say, Edna was my Sunday school teacher.
Tell me about your family. Your wife and kids.
Okay, my wife was Daylene Thomas, was her maiden name. We were married in 1974. We had 2 children. Shannon is the oldest. She lives in Pearl Grove now. As a matter of fact, she owns and runs the Crescent department store in Pearl Grove. And then Dale come along about 18 months later, and he's got Hill Electric. His office is in Farmington.
You mentioned earlier some of the things that you and you would do as a kid for fun. Tell me more about what you and your friends and siblings would do for fun when you were a kid.
Well, in the summertime, Goose Creek, which is just right down here in front of our house, was real clean back then, and there'd be a group of us get together every day and go swimming. That was one of our big activities. We went swimming every day. Of course, my mom and dad, they raised a big garden, and my mother canned a lot, but we had to keep the garden clean. We worked and kept it clean. And, you know, that's kind of what we did.
What did your parents and their friends do for fun when you were a kid?
Sometimes they'd get together and play dominoes and play cards. And I remember when the first TV come in the neighborhood, why Wayne and Cleola Smith, right west of us, we'd go down one night a week and watch TV because we didn't have one. Well, that was a big deal to get to go once a week and watch TV at night. I can remember whenever we got our first TV, it was an old black and white screen. And of course, you had to get up and go turn the knob, you know, to turn the channel, or you had to go outside and turn the antenna if you wanted to change channels. But that was a big treat for us kids.
What were some of the shows you remember watching?
Oh, Gunsmoke, just some of those old Western shows.
Tell me more about what you remember about Farmington, the community, and how often would you go into town, and what do you remember doing when you did?
We didn't go to town very often. Of course, there wasn't a whole lot to do in Farmington, but I can remember when we were growing up, my parents went to town to do all their shopping once a week. They'd generally go to Fayetteville to buy their groceries, and then Mom would go to the Crescent department store in Prairie Grove to buy our clothes. And if she forgot something, you didn't go back to town and get it. You just waited till the next week. And I can remember my dad talking about when they went to town, they would buy their groceries, enough feed to feed their milk cows, and maybe buy a set of shoes to put on their horses, and spend less than $10 for all of that.
Let's go back and talk about your grandparents and further back. How far back does your history go on this Goose Creek area?
Well, this place was bought, you see, I was born and raised right here. It was bought in 1918. But now my Grandma Gibson, they lived right east of us, and they were here, I don't remember what year they bought that place, but they've been here a long time.
Tell me more about them. Where was their place, and what all did they do?
Well, it was up the road, right at the foot of Gibson Hill. That's where that hill got the name Gibson Hill. Grandpa Gibson, they come in here from Tennessee. My great-grandpa Gibson, I think, was one that was in the war at Prairie Grove at the battlefield. But whenever they bought the place, it grew up in trees. They cleared it by hand, and they raised sweet potatoes for a cash crop. And I can remember my dad talking about helping them dig potatoes. They'd put them in the basement of their house, build a fire, cure them out, and then every Saturday they'd load a wagon with a team of horses and go to Fayetteville and sell that load of sweet potatoes. That was the way they made their money, was sweet potatoes.
Talk a little bit about how much times have changed from when you were a young kid to what they're like now. What are some of the things you notice different?
Well, everything's modernized. You know, we've got electricity. That's the cheapest labor we have. You know, we've got machinery to do the work so much easier. You know, back then they had a team of horses and a grubbing hoe. And that's the way they had to do it. And we have equipment and machinery to do it.
What are some activities and different things you remember over the years doing in Farmington? I know your kids went to school there, but besides school, what other things did you go to Farmington for?
Well, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot in Farmington because we had to go to Fayetteville to buy our groceries, and if we needed just some little something, well, you could stop in Farmington and get it. And Mom always went to Prairie Grove to buy our clothes. There just wasn't a whole lot to do in Farmington.
Did you ever go to any of the firemen's events they would have there, their annual pancake breakfast? Or
We went to the pancake breakfast.
how big a turnout how big a deal is that for that little town?
Oh, that's a big deal, and it's a real good fundraiser for the fire department. I don't know, they serve a lot of people. I don't know how many, but they do serve a lot.
You were talking earlier about some of the farm chores you did. Talk about maybe like how it was like putting up hay when you were really young, and how those kind of chores have changed.
I can remember when my dad, he cut hay with an old sickle mower. Of course, we didn't have the hay binds back then like we do today. You cut it, and then you raked it with a team of horses with what they call a bull rake. You raked it up in a row. And then they had a big bull rake they put on a little tractor, and they picked up a big wad of it and took it to the barn. And that's when we're putting up hay loose. It's not square bales, it's not round bales, it's loose hay that you put in the barn. And the only thing that I was big enough to do back then is they'd bring the hay in loose, they'd put it on a sling, and you'd pull the hay up in the barn loose. And I was big enough to drive the horse to pull the hay up in there, and whenever they got far enough, they'd holler, and they'd let the hay go, and then you'd drive the horse back and get ready to hook up again. And whenever we got a square baler, that was a big deal over loose hay. Of course, loose hay, you had to do a lot of pitchforking in the barn. And of course, us kids, if we wasn't having to help and work, which I wasn't big enough to do much work, but we'd get up in the barn and jump down on that loose hay, you know. And but then as time went on, we got a square baler. That made it easier. And then along about 1975, why the round balers come out, and you know, that made it easier. And they come out with the hay binds, and it would cut the hay and condition the hay, and it would make it dry faster. And things has modernized a lot.
What are some stories you can remember over the years of farming? You've spent several decades out here farming. Are there any memories that stand out, or any funny stories you can think of working on the farm?
Oh, no, not really. That I can really think of right off the top of my head.
If you had to tell somebody who'd never been out to the Goose Creek area near Farmington where you grew up, and they said, what's it like? What would you tell them?
Well, back when I was growing up, all of the roads were dirt. There wasn't but a few cars that passed. You knew everybody that passed. You waved at everybody. People had time to stop and visit with you and talk to you. People pass now, you don't know any of them. They don't have time to stop and visit like we did back then. But all of our roads were dirt back then. We didn't have blacktop roads. And of course, we rode horses up and down the road all the time whenever I was a kid. And you can't dare get out and ride a horse up and down the road today on these blacktop roads. People run over you.
If someone asked you to complete this sentence, what would you say? My favorite thing about Farmington is, what would you say?
Well, it's a nice, quiet little town. Very well organized. It's growing right now like crazy. The population around here is getting a lot more. Traffic's getting a lot more. But it's always been a nice, quiet little town.
Do you have any neighbors or friends you want to tell stories about or talk about?
Well, I guess I'm the oldest one on Goose Creek right now.
We were talking about jobs you had besides working on the farm, and you said that you also worked construction one summer. What else did you do?
A.C. Williams is a good friend of ours that lives over here at Farmington. He did a lot of custom work for everybody around Farmington because he was about the only one that had a square baler. Well, I started driving a tractor, you know, when I was real young, and so I think it was the year before I graduated, probably either 64 or 65, that AC wanted me to work for him one summer, putting up hay, helping cut hay, rake hay, and bale hay. So I worked for AC one summer, putting up custom hay for people. We worked for everybody all over the country. AC run all over the country to put up hay. And so I helped him one summer. And that's only 2 outside jobs I've ever really had.
You said that your dad always tried to encourage you not to be a farmer, but you wanted to be and that you did it anyway. Do you have any regrets?
No, my dad told me, he said, but I just want you to remember one thing. He said, farming's a hard life, but it's nice living. And I don't regret a thing. If I had it to do over, I'd go back and do it again.